everyone. This is Christy with Time to Profit. What I am here to talk about me first, if you don't know me, what I do is I work with business owners and solopreneurs who are struggling with sales. So if you are great at what you do, but you hesitate to pick up the phone and have a sales conversation, or you get to the point where you're doing a proposal and you have to ask if they want to work with you and you just panic and you don't do it, that's what I help business owners do, is just make peace with the sales process, but more importantly, to really break down the process so you can separate what is fact and what is fiction when it comes to sales, so that you can sell more effectively and in a way that is more rewarding for both you and for your prospects. So today I'm talking about 2 common myths around sales and how they relate to this topic of how can you make cold calling easier and more effective if you're doing it in your business. And I will say that a lot of people don't do it, even though they should be doing it, because they're scared of it. And a couple of these myths really speak to part of why it's so scary. And so the myths that we're talking about today is the first, that cold calling is pointless. It doesn't matter. It's not effective, right? And the second one is that you should give your customers what they want, which sounds great on the surface, but really fundamentally actually makes the sales process harder. A lot of times, right, cold calling does feel like a little effort. You feel like you're doing all of this activity and you're not really getting anywhere. And basically, you finally, you pick up the phone, you've mustered up the courage to call, maybe somebody answers, and then it's kind of like, boom, we're not interested, we're good, just go ahead and send us some information. Now's not a good time. Can I take a message and I'll pass your information along, right? So those are actually the most common responses you're gonna get when you make cold calls. The other thing that might happen is that people are really interested and engaged and they want more information and they connect with you and you set an appointment and you move to the next step. So that's the outlier on one side. The outlier on the other side is that you might get this hang up, right? Never call us again. Take us off your list. So those are the 2 outliers. They do happen sometimes, but more often than not, you're gonna get one of those first 3 responses. Send us some information. Can I take a message and we'll get back to you? Or send us it and we'll review it, right? So those are we're not interested. Those are the main responses. So this really leads up into the myth of giving customers what they want. If you give your prospects what they want is to be left alone. They don't want to have to think about anything outside of what they're already dealing with in their busy, stressful lives. So this is really important in sales, is that the biggest competitor you will ever have, no matter what your product or service is, and the biggest obstacle you will ever run into is inertia. Human beings don't like change. We like certainty, and change requires uncertainty, it requires risk, it requires effort. And so unless I'm actively searching for a solution, and we'll talk about this, but if you only focus on people who are actively searching for a solution at any given time, you're missing a big part of the market and you're commoditizing what you do. You want to get out ahead of the prospects and you want to get them ready to make a buying decision before they're even thinking about actively researching options. And that's a little bit counterintuitive, but it's really, really important from a strategy standpoint. And so if you give people what they want at that moment, what they want is just to be left alone, right? I've got enough crap going on at work today. I don't need to deal with you and more information and another decision and something to think about. And so giving them what they want would be just letting them not think about it, right? And then basically on a deeper level of that, outside of leaving them alone, that's not what they really want, right? That's what they want in the moment. That's what they want from their temporary solution standpoint. But if you think about beyond that, what they really want is to be successful, to have ease, to have joy, to make things simpler, right? Those are the things that they really want. And when they're picking up the phone and they've never had a conversation with you, there's not a lot of resonance and connection about how you're going to help them get those deeper things. And so again, they default to just leave me alone, right? And so if you give them what they want, you're going to miss an opportunity. But then it feels like, well, what do? I don't want to be pushy. I don't want to be aggressive. I don't want to be, right, a jerk. Of course not. But there is a way to move the conversation forward without being a jerk. And that's really, really what we're talking about today, is how do you move through that initial resistance in a way that makes cold calling worthwhile. And the number one thing you can do in order to do that is make sure you're calling and focusing on the right people. We've talked about that before. You're going to hear me talk about it all the time. But calling the right people is going to have a huge impact on your success. But the second thing that you are going to do, regardless of who you're calling, is to focus the call on forward progress. And this is something that's really hard to do. We get caught up in the mindset of the goal is to make a sale, or maybe the goal is to make an appointment, or the goal is to get a proposal, or the goal is to do a market analysis. That is not the initial goal. The initial goal is to just create a conversation and to develop a relationship with the person on the other end of the phone. And you do that by focusing on micro moments of forward progress. So the first conversation, yes, if you get to set an appointment, awesome, but that's not actually the goal of a first conversation. If you're truly cold calling, cold leads, the goal isn't always going to be to set an appointment. The goal is going to be to create some type of conversation and some type of connection. So how do you do that? How do you really get that information or engage your clients and your prospects in a way that helps you create forward progress in a conversation? So what I want you to do is think about getting some type of information that will make the next conversation easier and more meaningful for you and for the prospect. So maybe in that first conversation, if you are cold calling a company, if you are cold calling a household, if you are cold calling a business, you are thinking about who is the decision maker? Who is actually the person I need to be talking to? And so the first goal might be just to get the name of the right contact. So that might sound like, I was just calling today to see if you might be able to help me figure out who's the right person to talk to about XYZ, right? And then, is that person in? Great, awesome. But first start with, who is that person? So the next time you call, you know exactly who you're calling and you can start a conversation with the right person, right? So what I want you to think about is if you make a cold call and all that happens is that you get the name of the decision maker, you have won. That is forward progress on that call, right? That's great. That is a win. And we don't think about cold calling that way. We're so hyper-focused on the bottom line result that we forget that there is all of these other micro steps along the way. So the first micro step is, who's the decision maker? It might be, do they use a product or service currently that's similar to yours, right? So for me, I do sales training. It might be, have you currently done sales training? What vendor are you using? What was the last time you did it? Who's responsible for reviewing the effectiveness, right? If you can get all of these pieces of information, that is gold, because now you have a way to reconnect in the next conversation with something deeper. So I was making cold calls for a client today, and one of the people I was talking to said, they've been with the same software for 18 years. She's been off the office for 15 years. And first of all, that is really important information for me to have when I have a conversation with the decision maker. Second, it's a way for me to create a connection with her. Oh, you've been at that office for 15 years. It must be a great place to work. How do you like working there? And now when I call back, I've already established a little bit of rapport with her. So it's not about, you're going to be best friends, but can you create some type of connection that's real, that's authentic, that's based on information? And in order to do that, you have to focus on just really listening to these micro pieces of information and getting that micro information to move the conversation forward, right? So maybe you learn that the business that you're calling is growing. Maybe it's that they're experiencing turnover and they're going to have to be doing a lot of training of new employees. Maybe it's that they've never used what it is that you offer before. Maybe that now's not a good time because they've had a lot of staff turnover, right? all of this stuff might not seem relevant to what you do in the moment, but it can be really useful information in terms of creating dialogue and a conversation in the future. So once you have something, once you have a piece of micro information where you've moved that initial call forward, it's okay to end the call. Like, you don't have to wait for them to end the call. It's not like an appointment or they get off the phone. You can say, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate the information that you shared with me. You know, do you mind if I follow up with you next week to just share a little bit of information on how we might be able to help you with X? Great. Okay, we've made progress. Now the next time I call, it's not a brand new conversation. There's already we've established rapport, right? So I'm getting a little repetitive here because it's so important, and I want you to really, really focus on this, and it's going to make a tremendous impact on both how you feel about your cold calling, how you're measuring success, and the effectiveness of it. So then the next time you call, you can really use that information you gathered, right? So last time we talked, you mentioned that you're training some new employees. How much time does that normally take to onboard a new staff member? You know, just out of curiosity, what are the biggest challenges that you have in your training process? Do you do that training yourself, or is there someone else in your organization that's responsible for that, right? How are you using social media? Do you train them on social media too? Is that part of what you're doing? So you can start to get all of these really robust pieces of information through these questions over time. And it's thinking about this long-term approach versus dialing for dollars. I'm either getting an appointment or I'm crossing them off the list. It's more about, is this conversation moving forward? When it moves forward, how can I use that information to then move forward more effectively in the future? So that's what I really want you to think about in terms of forward progress in cold calls and hyper focusing on that. So the next thing you want to do is, I'm looking at my notes here, so I want to make sure we're covering everything. Oh, another great way to do that is then, right, like as you're continuing the conversations more and more, once you've got some information and had dialogue around a specific problem that your product or service solves, you can ask a really easy question like, you know, based on what we've talked about, it sounds like there's some real value in making your training processes a little bit more efficient for your team and training members. And I know that's not something you're really probably thinking about right now, but would you be willing to just sit down for a 20-minute conversation where I can share a little bit more about how this will help you with your onboarding process and make that more effective in the future? And I'm not going to try and sell you anything. I just want to give you the information so you can make an informed decision about how to move forward, and if what you're doing really makes the most sense, right? Really low risk, there's nothing for you to lose, just 20 minutes of your time. Would you be open to that, right? So see how you can use that information to really make the appointment setting much more specific to where that prospect is in their own life and in their own reality. So I want to use another example here. I'm going to use an insurance example. So say you are calling, trying to, right, get new clients. You want to do some proposals, see if you can get people a better deal on insurance. You can even just say something like, last time I called, you had mentioned that you had just renewed your policy with your existing carrier. Out of curiosity, during that renewal process, did you look at other coverage options? What was that process like for you? Did your plan change at all, or was it just the exact same plug and play, right? So all of a sudden now, because they told me they just renewed, okay, thank you so much for your time, I really appreciate that. Then I can call back, hey, you know, we spoke last week and I was thinking about you, and you had mentioned that you had just renewed, and it might seem counterintuitive to even have a conversation, but out of curiosity, what was that process like? Did you look at other options, right? Did you research, or did you just kind of go with what you knew, and why? Would you be interested in just having a quick conversation to see if we might be able to, you know, offer you a better product than what you're currently having, just so that you know and have the information. So see how that really helps move the conversation forward and makes it feel much more personal. So what do I want, like, what does all this mean? How can you implement it? What I want you to focus on this week is when you're having conversations with prospects, especially new prospects, I want you to really slow the process down. I want you to take setting an appointment off the table, making a proposal off the table, closing the deal off the table. Doesn't mean if there's buying signals there, you can't move forward with it, but I don't want you to be thinking about that. I want you to be thinking about what would be forward progress. What is the smallest amount of forward progress that I can make with this prospect? What's some information that would be helpful for me to have the next time I call and engage with this prospect, right? And then you can really use that information to have robust second calls. So when you call back, and yes, you're going to call back multiple times. That's how the sales process works. It's not one and done. And it will actually be much more rewarding because you'll get to know people in the process. But really slow it down. Focus on that, and then take really good notes. What's the piece of information that you learned? What was the forward progress in that conversation? So that when you follow up, you have something specific that you can talk about that they've shared with you in the past to make that conversation more meaningful for you and for them. Really focus on the long game, slow it down, be curious, hyper-focus on forward progress, and then celebrate those wins. So instead of just looking at how many appointments did you set, how many proposals did you do, what was your closing ratio, I want you to think about what percentage of calls did you make forward progress in. Like, what calls did you make that you got some information that you didn't have before? Because those are going to be really important things to celebrate. That if you are 50-60% of the time making forward progress in your cold calling, you're going to be more motivated to engage in cold calling and to do the activities that are ultimately going to lead to more sales, even if it doesn't happen that day. So I want you to really track that when you're having these conversations. Where was forward progress made? What did that look like? And then don't forget the follow-up, because it doesn't matter if you make forward progress if you just stop moving forward. So you've got to continue to move forward in the progress. It's not just a one-time deal. So that's your focus really for this week. Hyper focus on forward progress, and notice how that changes the cold calling process for you and changes your results. And then if you want more tools to help you become more effective in sales and make the process more rewarding for you and your prospects, head on over to mytimetoprofit.com. Again, that's mytimetoprofit.com. There is a free sales planning tool and checklist there, and there's lots of resources to help you start multiplying your sales and do it in a way that feels meaningful and joyful for you and your prospects. Thanks for your time today, and I will see you next week.